Hi, this is Jason Bunn-Parsons, and I'm once again with my mentor Sue for one final video in this series on analyzing the autistic educational system. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about early interventions, particularly that of the ABA. Interventions are very important. These are um, therapies that children go through prior to school. Well, because autistics can be diagnosed as young as 2 years old, and so this can give them a 3 year head start in order to try to catch up with their peers as much as possible, so that way they can be more ready for school. Once we get there, and so anyway, so um, and the reason why we're particularly selecting the ABA is because it is the most popular uh, form, one of the most popular therapies, and it does claim to be. And I've literally heard them claim that they are the only one that's actually based on science. And so, if you're going to be making that bold of a claim, then we're going to scrutinize your science. Okay, to be quite blunt about it. Okay. Yeah, those of you who watched the previous videos will know that Sue is very much into the latest science. So the idea that because Sue isn't an ABA therapist, that doesn't do things the scientific way, or however they justify making that statement that there's the only one that's based on actual science, is a little bit audacious. So it's so as far as me, I have um, tried out ABA for a couple of months, and so that there there's there's a few observations I have to make the about the particular variation used at the center that I was employed at. And the reasons that I quit was actually had more to do with administrative than the methodology itself. And so we were talking in some the previous video about how a lot of child care disability care companies view their employees as disposable employees. Well, my experience with the company that I worked for was basically we were like high-end day laborers, as far as they were so focused on making sure that there was enough therapists for all the clients. They didn't care if there was enough clients for all the therapists. Okay, and they would make these insinuations that, oh yeah, we'll start you off with one client, we'll see if we can add some more along the way. The thing is, listen very carefully what they're saying. They're not promising, they're insinuating. The same thing has happened, with respite care, and with a lot of other, um, jobs in which that where that they don't actually care if their employees can actually survive on these salaries. And so once again, when we're talking about the importance of consistency, when your therapist has to quit after a month or two because they can't afford, they can't pay their bills because those additional clients never got added on, like was insinuated that they're going to try to do. you know that's really problematic. And so I'm not going to say that every ABA provider does that. I definitely know that the one that I did operated in that manner. And so, that's, really, really problematic when you're talking about consistency. Now, another thing, to keep in mind at the specific place that I worked at, okay, and I don't know if you can get away with this outside the state of Arizona, but you most certainly can get away with this in the state of Arizona, is even though I took all the training classes, I never actually passed the certification exam, you know, through the BCAB, or whatever their acronym is, um, for a variety of reasons, but bottom line is I was a ABA practitioner without actually being able to pass that exam because basically they're testing us on all these three-syllable words without ever having taught us about autism, and that's the biggest thing. As I was going through all the training videos, when are they going to teach the therapists about autism? And they absolutely never did. Not one word was ever spoken about autism and understanding the individuals that they'd be working with. They're just teaching them all these big three-syllable words and how to apply these big three-syllable words, yeah, in their therapy. And so, it's so when they're talking about all these selling points, it's like, well, you know, you know, yeah, I'm okay, yeah, I'm kind of basically being redundant at this point, but once again, it's like, I was never actually certified. For 2 months, I worked with a boy when I wasn't actually certified to work with him. Yes, I passed. I did the training course, but I never passed the 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 certification exam. So, with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Sue, who has a lot more experience in understanding therapies and everything. So, go ahead and take it, Sue.
Thanks, Jason. You have to remember that ABA was created back in the mid to late 1900s. Back then, very little was known about what they call the black box or the autistic brain and how it functioned. So the methods were devised to simply deal with the behaviors that were observable. And to the goal was to change those behaviors to become more normal looking, i.e., eliminate the abnormal behaviors and reinforce exhibiting normal behaviors. And I have to admit, ABA wasn't around when I was a child. I never received ABA training, and yet I still ended up with chronic traumatic stress issues, which a lot of autistic individuals are saying they experience as a result of the ABA. I really think it's the underlying a subconscious social bias that exists about being different, and the assumption that everyone wants to be like the majority, like everyone else, um, which is not true. We all are different, um, and we need to respect each other's differences. And this is something that um, has been my passion, is to discover what are these differences. How does the autistic brain function differently? And this is an element I would like to see ABA better understand by including courses on autism to better understand the population that they are working with. Um, and right now, the proponents of neurodiversity are disputing the value of eliminating these autistic behaviors. They claim it forces autistic people to mask their the self they know themselves to be on behalf of a narrow conception of what is normal. And even though ABA trained teachers nowadays recognize, I've seen in social media, they recognize the need for play as a learning tool as opposed to sitting at a table and chair to learn. And also to recognize that, yeah, maybe only focusing on what they perceive as deficits is rather demoralizing. And that maybe they do need to focus more on strengths. Um, Although I question that they recognize, because many of our strengths have are actually a result of our differences. So oftentimes they're not recognized. Um, and the other thing that I think the neurodiverse community is upset about is the fact that programs still use this reward and punishment. Punishment being not adversive, most of them, there are still an exception, that use adversive strategies, but most of them still use the idea of punishment with this withholding what autistics want and in many cases need. And that becomes a form of punishment. So, what I would like to suggest are based on my experiences as a therapist working with the autistic population and from my perspective as an autistic, some strategies that I would like ABA trained therapists to consider using that I think would be much more respective of the differences that the autistic population that they work with demonstrates. Starting with recognizing that many of the autistic strengths that we have are a result of our difference, and they need to be encouraged and supported. Our attention to detail, the retention of facts, logical thinking, respect for rules, the fact that we can focus intently on something, and of course, our unique special interests are considered what we consider to be our strengths. And yet, many times, they are discouraged because they're not what you would consider typical sources of strength. Another thing has to do with autistic forms of play. Right now, many autistics are being taught how to do typical play. And yet, play is supposed to be spontaneous. It's supposed to be self-directed. It's supposed to be pleasurable. You can't teach because teaching means it's structured. It's not self-directed, and it's not necessarily always pleasurable because it doesn't make sense to us. So if you're going to be introducing play, you've got to look at it from an autistic perspective in terms of starting with what autistics consider fun, play, and what we are learning from our forms of play. And then helping us to expand our perception of what can be fun and what we can learn through play. Another area is the idea of rewards and withholding rewards. That puts the control in the realm of the adult that's doing the teaching. Whereas if you could change to offering rewards that actually appeal to what is motivating to the autistic individual, or allowing us to self-select rewards based not on the fact that you determine we've succeeded in achieving what you want us to do, but based on effort of working toward goals that make sense to us. Another component of ABA that I feel needs to be greatly tweaked is the component of compliance. It's inbred in the training that you must always be in charge. You are the authority figure, and the goal is to get them to comply with what you tell them they need to do. But I don't think you realize that by training autistic children compliance, many of them end up being compliant all the way through adulthood. They never really learn self-control. They become totally dependent on other people. And we are a very vulnerable population in terms of being easily taken advantage of, which means you're leaving us open to any authority figure for the rest of our lives of complying with they must be right and we're wrong, so we need to do what they tell us to do. And that's not teaching us what we need. I'm suggesting you need to learn to share control. And you still stay in control in terms of the options you give, but it's allowing them to make choices and decisions and accepting responsibility for the choices that they make. Also teaching consideration of each other's needs. And this is a very important lesson that I learned as a child from my mother, um, that if I understand why you're thinking the way and what's important to you, I can. Autistics can consider other people's needs besides our own, but we need to have you model it. And that's not what's happening in ABA. Another aspect of ABA is rote learning, i.e., continually repeating until they memorized. And yes, we are capable of memorizing, but once we've memorized it, do we even use it? If it doesn't make sense to us, we can, if prompted, we can repeat an action. But if we don't understand it, how much value is it to us? And yet, what you're instilling in the autistic individual is this fear of making mistakes. I have worked with so many clients that they just go into meltdowns if they think that they're going to make a mistake, and heaven to Betsy if they do. So I've had to teach them the trial and error approach, which is a very valuable tool to learning tool, and I call it the 3 out of 5 rule for just right learning. If you don't make mistakes, you're not learning anything. If you can do it perfectly from the onset, well, then you need to make it harder so that you have to keep working to get better at things. 3 out of 5 says if you can't achieve it at least 3 out of 5 tries, meaning you're making some mistakes, then you're not in the just right zone for learning. And we need to change it. And this is what I teach them. How do we make it easier? Or if it's too easy, how do we make it harder so that you always stay in that just right zone for learning? That totally eliminates that fear of failure and motivation toward learning. Another thing that I have found that unfortunately ABA looks at the external behaviors of autistic individuals and judges it from their perspective as to what those behaviors are telling them. And that means behaviors are socially driven. Autistics don't decide, I want to be echolalic rather than use normal language. We don't decide to do those behaviors that you see, or stimming, behaviors that you feel we need to change. Those are because the way our nervous system works and how we are attempting to cope with the way our nervous system is working. And if you don't understand that, you need to realize that what we're communicating by our nonverbal actions are not socially driven behaviors, but are a form of communicating what we need from you. Another area is focusing on behaviors as aberrant responses, such as if someone near me bursts out laughing, I'm going to scream because it offends my hypersensitive nervous system. And I'm trying to protect myself. And yet, that's an abnormal response. People don't typically do that. And so are going to correct me and say, don't stop doing that. Well, you need to look at it from our perspective and say, okay, you triggered that behavior. What could you be doing to avoid triggering that behavior? And what about some of those barriers that are up there to learning by bombarding us with words when our auditory processing is one of the areas we struggle with? And yet you communicate with us using words. There needs to be some acknowledgement and adjustment on the part of educators to recognize both the strengths and the limitations of the individuals that you're working with. Another area that I feel could be better tweaked in terms of how ABA teachers work with their students is encouraging them that they have to do things like everyone else, i.e., blaming their disability for their not fitting in. i.e., when you sit there and stim, you look weird, you disturb other people. It's your fault that you're not able to fit in. And so, yeah, autistics have a lot of difficulty in connecting socially with other people when these are the messages that they're getting. And no one's willing to accept the fact that we do process things differently and we're entitled to be different as everyone else is different from each other. We need to value our differences instead of blaming them. Um, Another area that I've found has to do with choosing the goals. As to from the non-autistic perspective of what you think the autistic needs to learn, without looking at what autistics want to learn from you. Things like sensory and emotional regulation, executive functioning, functional communication, not just rotely learned communication, but and social connectedness. We so desperately, that's what we want support in, and we want to better understand how to use to grow in these areas that will enable us to feel like we fit in. Another area is because of the rote repetition, the result oftentimes are development of splinter skills. And I think ABA teachers are very aware of this, that a lot of the things they teach them don't get used unless they're prompted, which means they never got generalized because they never understood why we're learning it. To change that, you can teach flexibility. Yes, autistics do like consistency and repetition because it's predictable, which because adapting to change is not easy. But you can teach us how to be flexible, and I call it flexible teaching, and introducing variable context within different contexts, not always the same, so that otherwise what you're teaching us is we have to do it exactly the way you taught us in that situation, and that's the only time. And so then we're going to insist we have to do it that way, and you're not teaching us to do it any other way. The final point that I want to make about how ABA needs to change is that the planning being done for autistic clients in IEPs and transition plans, and the writing of the goals are made without involving the autistic individual. And that's just simply not right, because we have our own perspective on what we need and want. We need to be involved. We need to have a say in the plans that are being made for us. Is there anything you want to add, Jason? Jason, you're on mute.
First, let me apologize. I lost internet over here for a minute or so. So could you do me a favor and repeat what you said? Maybe rewind yourself like last 2 minutes or the last point that you were making, because it may not have been picked up because of technical issues on my end.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure where I left off about basically blaming our disability
Okay.
for us not
So
fitting
start
in.
from there.
That part.
Yeah.
Okay. And choosing goals that reflect what others want us to learn. Did you get that part? Instead of recognizing what autistics are saying we want to learn.
Right. Okay.
You got
So
that part?
okay. Yeah.
Okay. Then I'm talking about splinter skills, teaching splinter skills through rote repetition that we learn very rigidly because it's taught very rigidly, but we don't use it in the context in which we need. ABA needs to change to do more flexible teaching, i.e., teach us flexibility by not always having everything exactly rote repetition, and vary the context in which you teach us specific skills so that we understand that it needs to be generalized to various contexts. And the final thing that I did bring up is about making plans for us without us.
mm,
We need to have autistics involved in the IEP and transition planning, even if we're not able to verbally communicate what we want. We can still be there to listen. We
mm.
can understand that what's being said about us um, is about us, and that we have a right to advocate for what we need.
Okay. Thank you, Ed. So yeah, I was making some notes as far as things I wanted to comment on. As far as what I view as bribing. Okay, yet to the point where during my ABA training, it was like the people training us was assuming that we're not going to cooperate unless you give us the incentive. And
Mhm.
my experience with the boy that I worked with is that I just built a relationship, and yeah, sometimes I got in such a routine that I forgot to give him his tokens and forgot to give him his, and we wound up, during that little stretch, actually exceeding the number of data points that were required to do because he was just what we just got focused on doing the program instead of obsessing over these data points and that's something that I did forget to bring up earlier is the fact that when they talk about how superior, how they're based on science. I question the legitimacy, of their science. Let's see here. Um, okay, so it's like, okay, so let's say one of the things we want to teach is, this is a battery, okay? And so today I'm going to be, showing them you know, I'm showing them this battery like 8 different times today, and every time they have to tell me this is a battery. Okay. So we got enough data points for today. 2 or 3 days later, battery is back on. So we got to do another 8 times. A couple days later, battery's back on the list, and and it's absolutely ridiculous that's it's not even the methodology. It's that that they just are so obsessed with collecting enough data points instead of just trusting the therapist to observe what's obvious in front of them, that this child is all knows what a battery is. Okay, you don't need to have him tell you 8 times a day every 2 to 3 days before you finally get it through your head that he knows what a battery is. And so then another thing is um okay, a lot of our deficits, when you're talking about our deficits become our strengths, well, it's because we wind up building up these countermeasures. Okay, and so like the example of okay, I definitely have deficits in executive functioning. Okay, and have difficulty, figuring out solutions. And so what do I do? So instead of trying to invent the wheel, I'll note that I've seen 6 or 8 people attempt to invent the wheel, and I'm going to analyze what they did. Okay, drawing on my memory to counteract the fact that I can't figure it out myself. And use this to create a hybrid wheel that's most perfectly suited for them. Okay, and so I can do this once I gain enough experience. I see multiple people attempt to do something, and and then I can just I like using the allegory of every piece of knowledge, every experience is like another brick of Lego. And as I get older, my box of Lego keeps growing and growing and growing, and so I now have more ability in order to problem solve because I can reach into my Lego box. Okay, and so that's using that's just showing that yes, my ability for memorization is more than just a party trick to impress people. It actually serves a purpose. And talking about how you know we that there's so much focus on getting compliance to the point where the child is focused on just pleasing everybody around them. Okay, that's called codependency. Okay, the definition that we use for codependency is when your identity and self-worth rests in other people. And I'm thinking this particular fifth grader, that was just obsessed with just he was always asking, did you like this, did you like this, did you like this. Now, he couldn't just simply do something, hand it in, and go about. He had to make sure that you liked that, because he became so obsessed with just pleasing everybody that that's what he was all about, is just making sure that you liked it. That's all that matters, that you liked it. And that's called codependency. Okay. And then the subject of internal self-control versus external self-control, um, where you're actually teaching us that these skills, like emotional self-regulation, instead of using punishment, okay, which is external self-control, because the self-control is coming from somebody, punishing you, and being your self-control, developing internal self-control by teaching, stress management, techniques, and, breathing exercises, and all these, various techniques that it teaches us how to control our own emotions and our own stress. And then finally, the whole subject of stimming. Enjoy the stimming. That the kids, the most fun that the kids are is when they are stimming. Just spinning around in circles and laughing. Enjoy it. Excuse me. Don't punish it. Enjoy it, because that is when they're the most fun. So, any last comments you want to make, Sue?
No, I think we've covered it.
All
And
right.
I certainly encourage, I think ABA teachers are looking
Mhm.
for other ways. I think they recognize that the strategies and tools that they're using are not getting the kind of results, because they do become attached to these children, and they recognize them as human beings, not objects that need to be manipulated. And so I want to encourage them to continue to look for some of these alternatives and listen to the voices of the neurodiverse community that is trying to let you know what it is we need from you.
Okay, and thank you, Sue. And so, like I said, we're closing this series out, and like I mentioned in the first video, I hope that a couple of these therapists, might watch this video and might be interested in engaging in dialogue, with Sue and I, particularly with Sue, and I hope that we've done this in a way that would help such therapists realize that it would be a constructive um, dialogue, and that we're not just going to beat them up and say how horrible that they are and stuff like that. That Sue and I reject that that approach, to discourse. We believe in having constructive dialogue. So I'm hoping, to get get some people to contact us who would be willing to engage us in this. So until then, I will see you around, Sue, and to the audience. I'll be doing more videos at a later time. I do have other videos on YouTube. The easiest way to find my videos is to do to search Jason Bunn-Parsons. Bunn is my biological last name. Parsons is my my adoptive slash legal last name. So whenever I do something unofficial, it's always Bunn-Parsons, where I combine the two. But anyway, so that's how you can that's the easiest way to find my videos versus the millions of other autism videos out there. Just type in Jason Bunn-Parsons and you will find my Autism Ambassadors Core channel. So until then, I bid you all farewell.
Thank you.